Here's a fact that might mess with your head. Your body actually cannot tell the difference between being terrified and being excited. Seriously. The racing heart, the sweaty palms, that tightness in your chest, it's the exact same biological chemical dump. The only difference is the label you put on it. So, what if the next time you felt that panic, you realized it wasn't a stop sign, but a biological green light? Here's how to flip that switch. Imagine waking up tomorrow morning, opening your eyes, and realizing that heavy, invisible blanket of anxiety is just gone. You step out of bed, not with that low-level dread about checking your email or that tightness in your chest about the future, but with a weird sense of lightness, unshackled. Now, be honest with yourself for a second. How much of your life right now is actually being dictated by fear? And I don't mean the screaming horror movie kind of fear. I mean the subtle stuff. The business you didn't start because you were afraid of looking stupid. The person you didn't walk up to because you were terrified of rejection. The trips you didn't take. The honest conversations you didn't have. If you look closely, you realize we are often sabotage artists, clipping our own wings before we even try to fly. But here's the thing. That fear isn't your enemy. It's actually an outdated biological program, a piece of ancient software running on modern hardware, and it's glitching out. It's trying to keep you safe in a world that no longer exists. But once you understand how to debug that code, everything changes. To really get a handle on this, we have to look at the machinery under the hood. Deep inside your brain, there's this almond-shaped structure called the amygdala. This is your survival center. For our ancestors, this was the key. When they were roaming the savannah and saw a rustle in the grass, the amygdala didn't wait for a spreadsheet analysis of the situation. It immediately flooded the body with cortisol and adrenaline. Fight or flight. Pure survival. And that was great when the threat was a saber-toothed tiger trying to eat you. The problem is, you aren't fighting tigers anymore. You're fighting passive-aggressive emails, overdue bills, and the fear of social embarrassment. But your amygdala, it can't tell the difference. It treats a public speaking gig with the same biological severity as a predator attack. It shuts down your prefrontal cortex, the rational, logical part of your brain, and hands the steering wheel to your instincts. That is why you can't think your way out of a panic attack. Your body is preparing for a physical battle that is never going to happen. You're revving the engine with the parking brake on, and it's exhausting you. This leads us to a massive realization, something the Stoic philosopher Seneca pinned down almost 2,000 years ago. He said, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." Think about the last time you were truly spiraling. Maybe you sent a risky text and didn't get a reply for 3 hours. What happened in your head? You didn't just think, "Oh, they're busy." No, you wrote an entire tragedy. You convinced yourself they hate you, you're unlovable, you're going to die alone, and cats will eat your remains. Psychologists call this catastrophizing. It's the brain's way of trying to predict the worst-case scenario so it can prepare for it. But here is the kicker. The simulation is almost always more painful than the actual event. The fear of the breakup is usually more agonizing than the breakup itself. The dread of the difficult conversation keeps you up for weeks, while the conversation itself takes 10 minutes. We are living in a hallucination of potential disasters that haven't happened yet. We are traumatizing ourselves with things that are pure fiction. So, how do we break the hallucination? It starts with that biological fact we opened with. The physiological signature of terror, racing heart, sweaty palms, shallow breath, is nearly identical to the signature of excitement. The body is just mobilizing energy. It's the mind that slaps a label on it. This gives us a loophole, a back door into the system. The next time you feel that surge of energy before a big event, don't try to calm down. Trying to go from high arousal terror to zero arousal calm is like trying to stop a freight train in 10 feet. It's impossible. Instead, pivot the train. Tell yourself, out loud, "I am excited." You aren't lying to yourself. You're just rebranding the energy. Top athletes and performers do this constantly. They don't try to suppress the butterflies. They just get them flying in formation. By changing the label from threat to opportunity, you keep the energy but lose the paralysis. You're hacking your own nervous system to use that fuel for focus instead of panic. But reframing isn't enough if you're still hiding. We have to talk about the most dangerous place on Earth, the comfort zone. We tend to view the comfort zone as a safe haven, a warm bed on a cold morning. But actually, it's a slow-motion trap. In the comfort zone, skills atrophy, confidence degrades, and ironically, the world becomes scarier because your circle of competence shrinks. The more you avoid the things you fear, the larger those fears grow in your mind. It's like a shadow puppet. The closer you get to the light, the smaller the shadow becomes. But if you back away, the shadow consumes the wall. Joseph Campbell, the mythologist, said, "Cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek." That is literal. The growth you are desperate for, the career, the relationship, the self-esteem, is physically located on the other side of the discomfort you are avoiding. There is a growth zone just past your panic. You don't have to leap off a cliff. You just have to step 1 inch outside the circle. If stepping out feels too abstract, let's get tactical. There's a technique popularized by Tim Ferriss called fear setting. We all set goals, but we rarely define our fears. Take a piece of paper. At the top, write down the thing you are terrified of doing. Leaving your job, posting your art, asking for a raise. Then, make 3 columns. In the first, write down the absolute worst-case scenario. Be graphic. You lose your job, you go broke, you have to move back in with your parents, everyone laughs at you. In the second column, write down what you could do to minimize the chance of that happening. In the third, write how you would repair the damage if the worst actually happened. Could you get a temp job? Could you apologize? When you do this, you usually realize that the fatal risk is actually just a temporary headache. You demystify the monster. You turn a vague, terrifying cloud into a checklist of solvable problems. This leads us to the gold standard of overcoming fear: exposure. You can't think your way out of a fear response. You have to act your way out. Every time you avoid a scary situation, your brain releases a little hit of relief. That relief rewards the avoidance. You are literally training your brain to be more afraid next time. To reverse this, you need controlled exposure. If you're afraid of public speaking, you don't start with a TED Talk. You start by making a toast at dinner. Then you ask a question in a meeting. Then you present to 3 people. It's called systematic desensitization. You are teaching your amygdala, rep by rep, that, hey, we did the thing and we didn't die. You are rewriting the neural pathways from danger to manageable. It's not about being fearless. It's about building a tolerance to the sensation of fear. So, it no longer dictates your behavior. There is a deeper layer here, though. It's the story you tell yourself about yourself. If your internal monologue is a constant loop of, "I'm socially awkward," or "I always choke under pressure," or "I'm just not a brave person," you will subconsciously sabotage yourself to make that story true. The brain loves consistency. It hates being wrong. So, if you believe you're a coward, your brain will generate fear to prove you right. This is where cognitive behavioral therapy comes in. You have to catch those thoughts in real time. When you think, "Everyone is going to judge me," you have to pause and ask, "Is that true? Do I have evidence for that? Or am I just projecting my own insecurity?" Rewrite the script. It feels fake at first, but over time, the new story takes root. You aren't a person who is afraid. You are a person who feels fear and acts anyway. That is a massive distinction. Ultimately, we have to stop fighting the feeling. Resistance creates suffering. The more you try to suppress the anxiety, the louder it screams. It's the beach ball underwater effect. The harder you push it down, the more violently it pops up. The alternative is mindfulness. I know it's a buzzword, but stick with me. It's just the ability to observe the fear without jumping into the river with it. Imagine you were sitting on the bank of a river, watching debris float by. That debris is your fear. Oh, there is a thought about failing. There is a sensation of tightness in my chest. You notice it, you name it, but you don't become it. You are the observer, not the feeling. This disidentifies you from the emotion. It creates a tiny gap between stimulus and response. And in that gap, you find your freedom. But finding that gap requires understanding the biological machinery that tries to close it. To truly master fear, we have to look under the hood at the hardware. Deep inside your temporal lobes lies the amygdala, an almond-shaped cluster of nuclei that acts as the brain's smoke detector. It has been there for millions of years, evolving to keep your ancestors from being eaten by saber-toothed cats. When the amygdala perceives a threat, it bypasses your rational brain entirely. It sends a distress signal to the hypothalamus, which activates the sympathetic nervous system. This is the HPA axis, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, in action. Before you can even consciously process what is happening, your body is flooded with cortisol and adrenaline. Your heart rate spikes to pump blood to your muscles. Your pupils dilate to sharpen your vision, and your digestion shuts down to conserve energy. This is a brilliant system for a physical threat. If a car is swerving toward you, you don't want to think. You want to jump. But here is the evolutionary mismatch. Your amygdala cannot distinguish between a predator hunting you in the savannah and an angry email from your boss. It treats social rejection, financial uncertainty, and public speaking as lethal threats. It hijacks your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for logic, reasoning, and personality, essentially taking your intelligence offline. This is why you can't think clearly when you're terrified. You are quite literally not in your right mind. You are in your animal mind. Understanding this mechanism is the first step to dismantling it because it depersonalizes the experience. You realize that the racing heart and the mental fog aren't signs that you are weak or broken. They are signs that your biological hardware is functioning exactly as it was designed, just in the wrong century. Once we understand the biology, we encounter a fascinating loophole in the system, a way to hack the hardware. Physiological arousal is ambiguous. The sensation of fear, racing heart, sweaty palms, butterflies in the stomach, is nearly identical to the sensation of excitement. The body is simply preparing for high-stakes action. It is the mind that labels that energy as negative fear or positive excitement. This leads us to a groundbreaking study conducted by Alison Wood Brooks at Harvard Business School. She wanted to see if people could simply calm themselves down before a stressful event. She brought participants into the lab and told them they had to sing the song "Don't Stop Believin' by Journey" in front of a critical audience, a nightmare scenario for many. She divided them into 3 groups. One group was told to say nothing. The second group was told to say, "I am calm," before singing. The third group was told to say, "I am excited." The results were counterintuitive. The group that tried to calm down performed poorly. Why? Because it is biologically impossible to go from a state of high arousal, fear, to low arousal, calm, in an instant. It's like trying to slam the brakes on a car going 100 miles an hour. But the group that said, "I am excited," performed significantly better. They stayed in a state of high arousal, but shifted the emotional valence from negative to positive. They didn't suppress the energy. They channeled it. This is called anxiety reappraisal. When you feel that surge of adrenaline, do not try to fight it. Do not try to force yourself to be calm. Instead, lean into it. Tell yourself, "My body is giving me the energy I need to perform." By relabeling the sensation, you transform the obstacle into fuel. You are not trembling because you are weak. You are trembling because you are ready. However, reframing the moment is only a tactic. We need a strategy for life, and that requires navigating the geography of growth. We often talk about the comfort zone, but few people understand the psychological mechanics of why we stay there and what lies beyond it. The comfort zone is a state of behavioral routine where anxiety is minimized and performance is steady. It is safe, but it is also a closed loop. Nothing new enters and nothing new leaves. Immediately outside of this is the growth zone, also known as the zone of proximal development. This is the sweet spot where the challenge is slightly higher than your current skill level. It triggers a healthy amount of stress, known as eustress, which focuses the brain and accelerates learning. But there is a danger. If you push too far, too fast, you enter the panic zone. Here, the challenge far exceeds your perceived ability to cope. The amygdala goes into full lockdown, and you retreat, often traumatized, back into the comfort zone, more afraid than before. The key to expanding your life is not to leap blindly into panic, but to expand the comfort zone incrementally. This is the principle of progressive overload, similar to weightlifting. You don't walk into the gym and try to bench press 500 pounds. You add 5 pounds a week. If you fear social interaction, you don't start by hosting a gala. You start by asking a stranger for the time. Then you compliment a barista. Then you have a short conversation. By spending time in the growth zone, your brain habituates to the stress. The boundaries of your comfort zone expand. What was once terrifying becomes mundane. This is how you build a courageous life, not through one heroic act, but through 1,000 small steps into the unknown, effectively annexing territory from your fears until your world becomes vast and limitless. While progressive exposure deals with immediate fears, we also need a tool for the existential dread that paralyzes our decision-making. We are often more afraid of the ambiguity of what might happen than the reality of the consequences. To counter this, we can turn to a technique popularized by author Tim Ferriss, which is rooted in the ancient philosophy of Stoicism. It's called fear setting. This is the inverted cousin of goal setting. Instead of defining what you want to achieve, you define exactly what you are afraid of. It involves 3 columns. In the first column, define, you write down the absolute worst-case scenarios of taking a risk. Say, quitting your job or starting a business. Be graphic. Detail the humiliation, the financial loss, the pain. In the second column, prevent, you list everything you could do right now to decrease the likelihood of those scenarios happening. In the third column, repair, you list what you would do if the worst case actually happened. How would you get back on your feet? Who could you call? What skills could you rely on? This exercise strips fear of its greatest weapon, vagueness. When you trap your vague anxieties on paper, you usually realize 2 things. First, the worst-case scenario is rarely fatal. It is usually just uncomfortable and temporary. Second, you have more agency than you thought. As Seneca famously wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." Fear setting forces the brain to switch from the emotional amygdala to the analytical prefrontal cortex, transforming a monster in the closet into a checklist on a desk. We must also address the specific flavor of fear that holds most people back. The fear of other people, fear of public speaking, of rejection, of standing out. This is not a logical fear. Modern society is generally safe. But to your evolutionary ancestors, social rejection was a death sentence. A lone human on the prehistoric plains could not survive. To be cast out of the tribe meant starvation or predation. Therefore, the brain evolved a hypersensitive alarm system for social disapproval. This is why public speaking is often cited as a fear greater than death itself. Your primitive brain equates 50 pairs of eyes staring at you not with an audience, but with a predator or a tribunal deciding your exile. This is what psychologists call social death. But we are no longer living in small tribes of 150 people. If you fail on a stage, or if you are rejected by a romantic interest, you do not die. You do not starve. The village remains. Recognizing this mismatch helps us rewrite the narrative. We have to consciously remind our primitive brain that the stakes have changed. The feeling of shame is burning and painful, yes, but it is not lethal. This is where community plays a paradoxical role. While we fear the judgment of the group, we also draw our greatest strength from connection. We mentioned Rosa Parks earlier. Her courage was not a solitary phenomenon. It was bolstered by a community, a movement, and a deep conviction in justice. Vulnerability, the willingness to be seen, despite the risk of rejection, is the antidote to shame. When you share your fears with a trusted circle, you break the illusion that you must be perfect to be loved. You realize that everyone is carrying the same heavy load of insecurity. In that shared vulnerability, fear loses its sting, replaced by the deep resonance of human connection. This brings us to the philosophical core of our relationship with fear. We treat fear as an enemy, an invader to be repelled. But what if we viewed it as a compass? The mythologist Joseph Campbell famously said, "The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek." This is known as the hero's journey. In every great story, the protagonist must leave the known world and venture into the unknown, facing dragons and demons. Psychologically, these dragons are the parts of ourselves we have repressed, our potential, our creativity, our shadow. Fear is often a marker of significance. We do not feel fear about things we do not care about. You aren't afraid of failing at something that doesn't matter to you. You are afraid because deep down, you know that this pursuit is vital to your soul's evolution. The intensity of the fear is directly proportional to the potential for growth. If your life feels stagnant, it is likely because you have built a wall against the very things you need to face. By turning toward the fear, by entering the cave, you integrate those shadow parts of yourself. You reclaim the energy you were spending on avoidance and use it for transformation. The fear is not a stop sign, it is a lighthouse. It is illuminating exactly where you need to go next to become the person you are capable of being. And this leads us to the final, most profound truth, the ultimate shift in perspective. We spend our lives trying to build walls against uncertainty, trying to control the uncontrollable, all to avoid the sensation of fear. But control is an illusion. Life is fluid, chaotic, and perpetually changing. The philosopher Alan Watts described life as a dance, and the only way to make sense of it is to join the dance. If you stand rigid, terrified of making a wrong step, you miss the music, you miss the life. Consider the metaphor of the ocean. You are standing in the surf, and the waves of life are crashing toward you. These waves are your fears, fear of failure, fear of loss, fear of the unknown. If you try to stand your ground and fight the waves, you will be battered and exhausted. If you try to run from them, you will live your life huddled on the dry, barren sand, never knowing the depth of the sea. But there is a third option. You can learn to dive into the wave. You can learn to swim. When you dive into the wave, you move with the energy, not against it. You realize that the water is not your enemy. It is the medium of your existence. Fear will never completely vanish. As long as you are growing, as long as you are stretching towards something greater, fear will be your companion. And that is okay. The goal is not a life without fear. It is a life that cannot be ruled by it. It is about reaching a point where you can feel the tightness in your chest, hear the doubts in your mind, and yet, with a gentle determination, take the step anyway. So, I leave you with this challenge. Do not ask for safety. Do not ask for certainty. Ask for the capacity to meet whatever comes. Look at the thing you have been avoiding, that conversation, that project, that leap of faith, and recognize it for what it is. The doorway to your next self. The cave is dark, yes. The water is deep, but the treasure is there. And you are ready to swim. Thanks for watching.